Thank you, Jade. Now, I did a whole lot of talk this morning about how incredible Hashan was, as well as the other panelists, and unfortunately, his wife is giving baby today, so we let him off with that as an excuse for not being able to be on the panel. So obviously, I've met you guys would all know this. For the last since 2009, the area of life science and medical device has been a passion area for Wholesale Investor. For just so a lot of you wouldn't know this, but for us, it's our second most significant area. As far as the types of companies we work with, and I mentioned in my opening talk that, and one of the funds is here today, that literally in the last 12 months is the first time I've seen 5 new funds in this space. And, it's all come about in the last sort of 12 months. And I can't remember seeing, 5 new life science or medical device funds in the last 10 years. And typically when I start to see that kind of activity, that's a bit of a signal for me. And as I mentioned to you, earlier as well about the innovation sort of bull run. One of those areas that tends to do incredibly well when the markets are on, but also when the markets are down, it gets punished the most as part of it, which then also creates the opportunity for investors at the exact same time. So on that note, I'm going to give the opportunity for Andrew and Leslie to provide introductions for themselves. Over to you, Andrew.
Hi, everyone. Andrew Spears, one of the founding partners and currently the managing partner at SoHi Partners. So we established about 12 months ago. We've been raising capital. Through that period, we've been deploying capital for the last 6 months as well. Our first round was successfully oversubscribed, which we're really pleased about. And within 6 months of allocation, we're returning a 40% IRR for investors. So we're doing really well. And I think Steve's absolutely bang on the money. There's definitely a lot of opportunity in life sciences, in particular, where we are in the valuation curve at the moment. Just natural dynamics of aging population, ailing population. Everybody's finally woken up around the value, to Paul's notes, of advanced manufacturing. Life sciences, medtech, biotech within that is obviously advanced manufacturing as well. So thank you.
Let me see if this works. Hello. Hi, my name is Leslie Chung, and I am the Managing Director and CEO of Imugene. We are squarely in the oncology or cancer drug development. I've been a cancer drug developer for over 24 years. I hate to think about how long that is. I clearly started when I was 12. So I have 4 drugs. Thank you for laughing. I have 4 drugs, cancer drugs, that I have helped shepherd through, not only through the clinical development phase, but also to market. And so I've worked at huge pharmaceutical companies like GSK, Exelixis, and Genentech, which is, the world's largest biotech company for oncology. So I have lots of experience. So coming over to Australia has been a very huge learning curve for me. But when I first started at Imugene, which was 2015, it was a $5 million market cap. And I have
That's exactly when we started working with you.
And Steve and I have been working together for a while. And in 2021, it was roughly around 3.5 billion. And it's because we had a very successful phase 2 study. So, I mean, that is the power of drug development and what you can do with finance that can put power behind a meaningful cause, which is drugs for when we get older, when we get sick. And it's not just for me, for my family, but it's for mankind. So I'm here to talk about Imugene and what we can do, but we also need money for that to propel us into drug development. So thank you.
Perfect. I'll kick off with you, Andrew, on the first question. Now, obviously, medical device is considered less, I suppose, a little bit less risky than the hard path Leslie has chosen as far as drug development, but still there's an element of risk to it. From your perspective, how do you balance that? And obviously you mentioned about some of your returns. How do you balance that sort of investment in innovation, which does inherently carry risks, with understanding the true value of an opportunity and balancing the opportunity versus those risks?
Yeah, I mean, look, our individual strategy is we've heavily stacked the bench with highly capable, smartest people in the room, sort of advisors. So we have surgeons, deans of universities, the chair of Adelaide and UNSW Science Medicine on our advisory panels looking at our devices. So, these people get the information, they look at the peer review papers, they look at the data that's out there, and they make incredibly educated decisions around, why is this innovative? Is this actually innovative? Is this going to work? What's it doing differently at a scientific level, from even therapeutics and medicines as well. We actually do look at those. And I think functionally the risk isn't different. It's just the delivery time and the regulatory pathway. So, there is risk within time as well. Yep. But functionally, it's the same risk on a different time frame of delivery. And, investors, and I'm sure there's a lot of investors in the room today, they want to get a return at a certain point. So as a fund with, say, an 8 to 10 year horizon, you tend to look more at the shorter term ventures, which is naturally devices. So how do we manage the profile between risk and innovation? You've really got to find the right people to back. Researchers like Leslie who have a commercial mindset, who have experience, who can manage people are very rare to find. But when you find those people, you back those people and you give them everything you need and you stay the hell out of their way.
And Leslie, I'll ask the same question to you, but from a different perspective. I can sort of see, you mentioned you sort of got 4 drugs that are sort of in clinical trials at the moment. As a CEO, how do you balance that sort of combination of innovation inside your own business and also risk as well?
Well, I echo what Andrew is saying. You've got to work with bright minds. So on my clinical development team, we have folks that have developed like products before. So we've got a very tricky, very hard to develop product called chimeric antigen receptor T cells. This is by way of genetically modifying your entire system so that it rights the wrong of cancer. And so you need lots of scientific knowledge as well as development pathway. We have very smart regulatory people as well as clinical developers who have done this before. So hiring the right people and for your team, not just aptitude, but that attitude of let's do something different, let's do something meaningful, and let's do it as fast as possible because patients are waiting is sort of our motto.
I just wanted to add in there, I felt like this needs a bit of voice as well. Sometimes we just don't see stuff that's investable. And what we do is every Friday, the partners get together and we'll sit down and we'll talk about the topics that we want to address. Us as investors, we want to see something globally addressable. It has to significantly improve human life. It has to be a large, globally scalable investment. And sometimes in the pond of Australia, we just don't see those opportunities. So we will actually sit there and talk through with our medical advisory panel, what are the big issues, what are the thematic issues, as well as going from the ground up that need to be addressed. And we'll often, we have the luxury of having a venture studio or a venture lab where we'll actually say, okay, here's a team of people that can solve that problem. Here's some capital to go and solve that problem. Get into it, guys. So we actually, to sometimes manage that risk and innovation side, we actually take on all of the risk and do all of the work as well.
And Leslie, just for you in the area of innovation, for the area of immunotherapy, for me, we were talking about this before this session. There's a couple of frustrations around sort of the way, I suppose, you have to go through your trials. And we we're talking about how, if someone's got cancer, there's sort of weird protocols in that the first thing they do is sort of look to do sort of chemotherapy and do it as a combination of immunotherapy. And then the second part to that is when the chemo is not working, then the next thing they decide is they offer you trial drugs as opportunities. But then some of the trial drugs they offer as opportunities, you can't have had chemo before it. And so there's all these sort of weird nuances that you would have to navigate. How do you navigate that process and is there sort of, I suppose either frameworks or, processes in place to help try and put immunotherapy at the front of the procedure or at the protocol list when someone's diagnosed with cancer?
So just to clarify to you folks that may not know, when you go on a clinical trial, you actually had to have failed several lines of therapy before being included into the trial, so you don't meet the inclusion exclusion criteria. But so you've had very sick population to trial a drug, a potential drug that could possibly work when you first are diagnosed. Because we all know when you're first diagnosed, to do something then arrest your disease from growth is the best possible way for your diagnosis. However, the FDA, along with regulatory bodies, do not allow you to skip lines of therapy. So that's why in clinical trials you get very sick before you come on a clinical trial, which is, um, it's what they make us do, the regulatory path to a drug development. However, you have to, just like Andrew says, you have to get bright minds, look at the competitive landscape, see where you could fit in. Could you better that drug that's already in clinical trial or that's already marketed? And then you have to go head to head, which is quite expensive. So what we do is we look at a very niche market so that you can get approval faster and you can get more patients in and provide that care so that it could skip that line of therapy. So that's possibly right now sort of going around the regulatory procedures, but it's likely the best way to develop a drug, especially in cancer.
Got it. And Andrew, for you, you mentioned that you've basically had some early wins with the fund. I think it'd be worthwhile to do a bit of a deep dive into those wins, and far as go back as to, and if you're allowed to talk about their name, please do. If you're not, feel free to figure out a way to do it. Mention about your investment thesis going in, how you come across the opportunity, your investment thesis, and then how it's actually sort of played out, and what were the key signs for you that you were starting to get traction in this investment opportunity so early? Because that's a fairly quick sort of turnaround of an opportunity creating value in life science or in medical device.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's no overnight success in medical devices or medical technology. Quite often, the research and the data points behind a device has been developed over 25, 30 years by a scientist who has plugged away until they can absolutely prove it and take it to market. So, we were lucky that we had two businesses linked to two of our founders, but not necessarily by two of our founders, that we were able to take advantage of. So our investment thesis was put together around the basis of there is an aging and ailing population. Musculoskeletal systems in particular have been heavily underinvested in. No offense to Leslie, but cancer gets a lot of funding. Cancer gets a lot of funding, but things like arthritis, mobility get almost zero funding and grants from a government level, but are significantly impacting not just the Australian population, but the global population. So that was our investment thesis. And then we sort of said, well, anything within the broader healthcare ecosystem we'll also look at where it adds value. So we identified two opportunities. One was for a regenerative therapy molecule called CB2005, set up by a business called Cartago, where they effectively have synthesized a molecule that regenerates soft tissue that has been damaged. And that soft tissue is showing early indication through 4 animal trials in spinal disc degeneration. It's also showing regeneration in the meniscus and cartilage tissues. It's showing regeneration capabilities within tendons and also in neuro and ocular degeneration as well. So, I mean, right there, that's a $1.5 trillion market. If it can capture 2% of that, we're very happy. As it's gone from theoretical trials, animal trials being completed, there's obviously been new investors come in. Just last week, we successfully secured a $3 million family office partnership on Cartago, and they've now taken it effectively fully funded to end phase 1 human trials. And that'll be commencing soon at Kogarah Hospital. The other one is the root tendon business. I think you've heard me talk about. Incredibly innovative business, taking kangaroo collagen and implanting that technology into humans. They've developed an ACL and exterior cruciate ligament product as one of their initial trials. And they've now realized that kangaroo collagen shows extremely strong regenerative properties and is very easy to grow, and is now being used on a trial basis for skin grafts, meniscus, and they've also developed a putty to attach a xenograft. I know I'm speaking a foreign language to almost everybody in the
So
room.
you've heard it here first. Kangaroo tendons for the win.
But basically, a xenograft is an animal graft into a human, as opposed to an autograft where you use the tendon or graft from within the human body, or cadaver tissue. And there's not enough cadavers in the world to replace ligaments and tendons and etc. So basically, they have put it into humans, and they've created a putty that can now attach that ligament to artificial hips, artificial knees, which is the first artificial material to ligament putty that's ever been created. So those guys are, for all intents and purposes, going to be a unicorn. We got very lucky with our investment into them at such an early stage, and we're going to stay with them until they probably list, or Zimmer or J&J or somebody wants to come and offer them a significant check.
Leslie, one of the common conversations I had with the different fund managers, that especially the ones that are looking from the outside, looking at Australia, is that they highlight how structurally undervalued Australian life science companies are compared to their international competitors. If I think it'd be helpful for them, like obviously you spend a lot of time sort of going overseas, you've raised a lot of capital from international investors, maybe you can give some sort of idea around the percentage of what that looks like. But from your perspective, like if you were to look at a replicate sort of version of your business in the US, what does that market cap difference look like? And then how do you approach that from your own perspective as CEO?
Well, so, if we have four ongoing clinical trials with some successes that we've already had in phase 2, and the US market, biotech market and pharma company is huge in the US. I mean, that is the primary sector. That's a real class there. As opposed to here in Australia, I can only think of a handful of biotech companies that are in the sort of the right market cap setting. I dare say, I mean, if these biotech companies were in the US, we probably would be 400% more than what we are here. There are, we thought about, I mean, I think that's why everybody thinks about listing on NASDAQ and et cetera. But you really need to, I think some successes here will translate into the US market. We do a lot of our clinical trials in the US because, again, we go to where the patients are. But yes, I think that the value is very different here in Australia versus the US.
We did some research at SoHi Partners for a paper we put together the other day, and it was, I mean, Australia, we all know the statistics. Australia's global population percentage is 0.6%. Our GDP is 1.6%. We're currently 0.8% of life science, medtech, and healthcare companies globally, whereas our research output as a society is 3% of the global output. So there's a functional gap between research commercialization in Australia, and there's a lot of inherent barriers as to why that is. And you're only talking about a 3.75 times multiple, right? But that creates something like 60,000 jobs and $3 billion to the Australian economy. So there's a lot of money that needs to be reallocated to proper growth, advanced manufacturing, medical research, commercialization in Australia. We spend $52 billion a year on our military. Just shaving a small portion of that off to life sciences will significantly impact global healthcare.
I think the interesting thing that I've, in my observations for the last 12 months, there's a lot more governments that are trying to throw money into this space. Now, obviously, I prefer private markets sort of investing into it, but clearly they're trying to make up the gap. And as I mentioned, the 5 different funds, sort of looking, including yourself, looking to invest into this area. My next question would be, obviously, I'm pumped about the potential for AI, for robotics, and this whole event, is sort of built around that. So what I'd love to understand is from a pragmatic perspective, and also from an investor's and from a CEO's perspective, and technically you're an investor because you've got 4 different drug trials as well as part of that. How does it impact your thinking about the way you do things, the way you model things out from a cost perspective? Because I'm seeing there's even cases coming out where effectively people are utilizing AI to design clinical drug trials then also to assist with, the data that comes out of those. Give me your perspective on what are some of the early changes that you're observing in life science about how people are utilizing sort of AI, software, technology, et cetera, in the process. And I'll get on to you with this, Andrew, as well.
Well, I think AI has really just leaps and bounds because the a massive amount of data that they can
Give some
process.
perspective. How much data you'd have to process when you're going through a trial?
I mean, well, so in order to go into a clinical trial, you have to go under at least 15 years of research before that. So, not that we acquire a drug when they're just about clinic ready or ready to be put in patient. Then we can evaluate because 1 out of 15 drug passes to go to a patient. So you can have a lot of research pre-patient enrollment. So that being able to crunch those numbers of 15 years into, I don't know, I dare say an hour. I mean, it's incredible. You just need to be able to analyze that data. So I think where it will make a difference is in pathology because currently when you get a pathological report, a doctor, a PhD will look at that path report, whereas a computer can actually see little dots much more cleaner and can evaluate. So almost 99% of the time, an AI computer will be able to diagnose the pathological report better than a human because we're prone to errors. We get tired no matter how brilliant and that they can be. So I think in pathology, it's going to make a huge difference. I think radiology as well, being able to read a scan. I don't know, has anybody seen a scan before? And it just looks like it's just lit up, right? And you have to be an expert to understand that filial details of the lighting makes a difference whether if that's cancer or not. And sometimes that's the only way that you can detect certain kind of cancer, especially if it's colorectal, it's not something that you can take a biopsy, etc. So that minutia detail difference, and a computer can pick that up. So I think AI is already making a difference of diagnosis and pathology reports as well as radiology, where in the I would say in next 4 years, a lot of these preclinical data and what becomes a drug candidate to go into patients is going to be rapid as opposed to this laborious process to say KRAS might be the one that we're going to, and then how to finely tune that inhibitors is where it's going to make a difference in AI.
I was going to say the other thing I've found helpful from my own side is having access to tools like that. Like for me, I've got a family member, who's going through cancer, and basically I've got an entire chat stream built around it. I've uploaded all their material, and it's been incredibly helpful for me to ask questions at 10 o'clock at night when there's no doctor I can call or no one that I can have a conversation with at that time. To me, that's also from my side, that's where it's become super helpful. But I'm curious for you to ask you this question. If you're going to, like, let's say phase 1 or phase 2, how could that potentially change that cost difference of how much you need to invest to go to given there are less people required, there less time as far as for data analysis, etc. What can that potentially look like going
Well,
forward?
unfortunately, clinical trials still needs to be done with patient. So it's still a patient by
Getting to it.
patient. So getting there, having the right scientific drug candidate may be easier, and a diagnosis of patients eventually when the hospitals, we all know hospitals are kind of late to the game in terms of adopting new research or developments. I remember going to a hospital back when I was studying and asking what drugs are you using for this kind of patient, and they didn't know that it was approved. They're very slow adopters. I think it's become a lot better, but AI will help in terms of diagnosis, of prognosis perhaps, but in terms of clinical trial, the cost savings and the time savings will be done in crunching those data, but you still need live patients in order to get on clinical trial.
And for you, Andrew, let loose. I'd love to know how robotics, how AI, software, etc., can make an impact in the medical device area.
Yeah, look, I mean, it can make a phenomenal impact. I don't think it will disrupt. I think it will be an enabler. So if you look at all of the great human revolutions from an industry perspective over time, they haven't necessarily taken human out. They've enabled a human to do more. And as such, AI is another tool that we now have to be significantly more efficient. Robotics takes strain away from a body. It provides 24/7 operating, within frameworks. And machine learning and all of these tools help you make better decisions with data. So it's an enormous enabler. I personally use AI every day. I've got at least 3 different subscriptions. It helps me write investment memorandums. It helps me write responses to emails. It helps me with my investment risk committees. It helps me from a board governance perspective, writing up minutes, sending them to the auditor to make sure everything works efficiently. That's something that you would have needed an offsite or an assistant to help with previously. I know for a fact that surgeons we work with, innovators we work with, use these tools to enable themselves to be more productive and more effective and help you rule out things that are not going to work faster and areas that should be focused on. Now, to Leslie's point, from a regulatory perspective, we are very well aware that the regulators have a huge skepticism, in particular around machine learning and AI as a tool for making a therapeutic decision, a prescription decision, or some sort of approval. I think that they are learning over time to get comfortable with machine learning and robotic process automation. But I think large machine language models and things like that that are effectively making a decision, they are still some far away from being able to support that. And I think rightly so, because the regulation from a medical perspective is there for a very important reason. When you put something into a patient, and as a user of medical devices and also medicines myself on a daily basis, blood pressure, who would have thought? It's important that you want to know that what you're putting into yourself and what you're using actually does what it says on the tin. And if you can't understand and explain how the large language model got to a decision point, it could be wrong.
And Leslie, as a final question, said big believer in the potential for immunotherapy and sort of how it works. What do you see as the sort of top key trends for life science? Like when you're thinking about your day to day, you're investing in the future from your business perspective, your CEO, as a time, your energy, etc. What do you see as the next big trends for life science that you're focused on?
I think regeneration. I love the idea of being able to grow your own ligament, cartilage, things like that, because those are everyday things that just wear out. Much in the same way in cancer, cancer is our cells aging to the point where it gets mutated. If we had regenerative powers, and I think AI is going to be quite helpful in that. We have billions of genes in our body. We need to be able to diagnose something expeditiously, but also be cautious about how we're developing products because you I completely agree with Andrew. The regulatory bodies are there to be the police of safety and efficacy because they're there as a gatekeeper of allowing harmful things to be approved at the end of the day. But I think regeneration, that helps all of us in so many ways to not only live longer, but maybe more healthily because living longer, I can't imagine that it would be great if you don't have that quality of life. So rather than abating and a disease, say cancer, from growing, the idea of making your own body regenerate, I mean, I think that's the new
Why is something like stem cells so difficult for regulatory approvals in Australia?
the body is a very curious thing. Just because it generates in stem cell, that doesn't mean that the other path is you can. It's just like any sort of machine. If you construct something that works in one area, you still have other malignancies happening and firing. So you're gonna age exactly the same. So does it offer you better pain management? Can you live longer? What's the effect? So in comparison to what's out there, if it's not any better, then they're not going to approve it. And I can't blame them.
And you, Andrew, what do you see as the top, let's call it 3 trends sort of to expect from life science and medical device over the next few years that investors can participate in?
Yeah, definitely regenerative medicine as well. We're not meant to live as long as we currently do. When we stepped out of the primordial swamp and walked out of Africa, we were living to 20 to 30 years old, right? The body was genetically dispositioned to that. We now have certain countries with a good diet where they're living to, 100, 110 years. And we have the potential to live to 200 years with a good change in diet, change in medicines and regenerative capabilities. And I think regenerative medicine is about to have its honeymoon, and it's about to hit the market. There's several therapies out there. We're invested into one, which is, in my personal opinion and that of our investors, the best. And if anybody would like
Unbiased speaking.
and if anybody would like to invest in us, please have a discussion with me. But capital at risk. But I think the next one is probably one I'm still slightly skeptical of, which is digital and telehealth. I think there's a lot of opportunity for efficiency of services and access to doctors, particularly in developed markets and developing markets. But I am worried that it will lead to a deterioration in the quality of care. And I think they've probably already had their honeymoon, and they're now finding their use cases rather than it being for everybody. I think we've realized it's not, a bit like Deliveroos and milk runs. And I think the next one is probably in animal implant into humans, so xenografts for, heart valves. We're seeing a business that's implanting, a different type of non-bovine bovine, so non-pig or cow heart valve tendon. And we think that animal implants into humans will probably be the next big area as well from a device perspective, as well as robotics supported by AI for things like bionic hands. Tasker was a great example of that. TASKA, one of our guys was involved with that one. They were the first waterproof bionic hand. It's now using AI technology to automatically presume where you need to move and what you need to do and all of these sorts of things. So, and I saw a great thing the other day where it was a kid's hand shaped like Iron Man. And it was absolutely brilliant. Like, I think you're going to see ultra customization in the bionic components space as well.
That will get very funky very quickly. I was going to say, just and I know Leslie didn't sort of mention herself, but the area that you're in as far as immunotherapy, from the body, basically being able to be stimulated to fight for itself is one where I see as being pragmatic and logical as being one of the big opportunities going forward over the next decade. And I'm sure there'll be other sort of drugs that come through, and I love the way in which you approach it. And the other thing I'll just mention is that, just recapping from this from a conversation perspective is that, the Australian life science and medical device is, said everyone's recognized it for a long time. It is structurally undervalued. These companies do an incredible job of actually going overseas and creating opportunities for themselves via all the different conferences, etc. And I will say that having a family member sort of go through this process with cancer, I think there's unbelievable inefficiency still in the entire process, from the way they get their drugs, from the way information is collected in the actual process. The drug trial process is ridiculous as far as it's very hard to find the right sort of matching trial. In fact, they provided trials which weren't even relevant, for my family member. And that sort of stuff, like, you just sit there from someone who, you have to build processes, you realize that they work incredibly hard to do what they do on the product side, but actually getting the patient to meet the right product is still a very inefficient process. And even you mentioned about telehealth, when someone's got cancer, the amount of meetings the amount of doctor's appointments they have to go to, they're going to anywhere between 3 to 4 a week, which pretty much one visit a day can wipe them out, anyway. So for me, it's not only just what they're doing on the drug delivery part and on the medical device area. I just think the entire whole process is unbelievably inefficient and a great opportunity to be solved at some point. And I think if they solve those areas, it does help, does advance some of the cases on the drug discovery part. So, ladies and gentlemen, can you please give a round of applause to our panelists, Leslie and Andrew? I said I've known Leslie. I've known Leslie, since 2016, 2017. As I say, all my presentations, she's one of those CEOs that absolutely inspires me. The way she thinks about business, the way she just pragmatically just builds, keeps on evolving what they're doing on Imugene. And I really hope in this next bull run she experiences what she did in 2020 and 2021. And Andrew, thank you very much to you. Said we've known each other for the last sort of 12 months, and you've always been very giving of your time and energy to help educate on this medical device area. We all know it's a great opportunity, but you don't really have too many people you can actually get into the weeds and understanding some of the technical aspects with it. And it's just fortunate that even though that's not your background, you got a team full of people that is very strong in that area, and then you help on the deal structuring side. So thank you again. Much appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy your lunch. Obviously, lunch is going to be around there. We've got all the tray tables. When we start ringing the bell and I start shouting at you to come back in, can you please come back in after the lunch session? We've got obviously we've got a keynote on about what's happening in the Middle East and the investment and basically the potential for companies in the Middle East. Then also the future of food. And also we dive deeper into energy storage, AI, and also robotics in the next panel session. So absolutely all the fun stuff coming forward in the afternoon session. Enjoy your lunch.